Hi. Um, I literally just finished the last aspect of my tracking tool, and I think it's really quite important, especially because I guess I was quite sick and literally almost like half dead when we finished the Kalahari, and so I didn't actually document anything there, as well as Maun, but that was like a lot more like emotionally driven. Just as an overview, and maybe I'll touch on the specific ones, the specific locations, and then literally maybe give a sort of landscape overview. So the first, we had gone to Maun, and in Maun, it really was. It was quite complex, I must say, because there were sort of some limitations with regards to who we can engage. There's a bit of a gatekeeper culture. So there'd be a specific focal point that you have to actually contact. And, if you don't actually contact that person, then it might not necessarily be credible. So this can really be, and it's understandable because there are, I guess maybe issues of trust. Um, and maybe because there's a lot of it's a tourism town, so there are people who are always coming and leaving in terms of sort of securing opportunities. There's a lot of internal migration in country generally, and I think one of the other things is obviously, yes, in as much as there's a lot of opportunity, there's also turnover, and some of the larger things that are beyond the control, such as the economy of the location. So I think Maung was really pretty much a case of, I guess, maybe better understanding, and it was really eye opening in that the call when we were in Gasani to go to rural areas was emphasized, and particularly because Maung is much closer in terms of proximity to the Kalahari, and a lot of other sort of, I guess, multi subgroups or ethnic groups. So there's the Herero and a few others that I actually didn't even know about. The Herero who are also linked to Namibia. Um, and I think what was beautiful about that is that we actually collected quite a lot of videos where people were willing to share some of their stories in terms of some of their stories or their perceptions or their opinions or their calls to the public or even members of the community in terms of issues of violence, and in terms of basically young youth, sorry. So that was really fantastic and great. In the Kalahari, what we did is actually in sort of call or rather engage people along the way. So we made stops in Kanye, Jwaneng, Kang, which was really just more of just being able to get rest because it's about 400 and something or close to 500 kilometers from Gaborone. We drove, and then connected to Ghanzi, which is basically in the Kalahari. Um, I guess, starting from Kanye, it was really sort of clear that there's a lot of, again, migration because some people either schooled in Gaborone and were just basically there for attachment. Others were basically, I guess, maybe at work, so it was a bit difficult. So we literally had to sort of like go to the individuals at their respective places and sort of park in the car park and have sort of discussions. And then what we realized very quickly is that you need to create the time, the space. Not necessarily that people weren't willing, but it wasn't an ideal environment from, I guess, maybe protocol, ethical, and just practical perspective. But at least we did actually have surveys conducted, and then getting some sort of insights, which really were quite a bit similar to some of the other areas that we collected data. So there was nothing that was really quite prominent, and then also just looking at the fact that some of the experiences were not necessarily unique to that location, or rather were actually quite applicable across board. In Jwaneng, we we had quite a few discussions, but obviously also mobility is quite an issue. People who do live rather in Jwaneng sometimes would be coming from a different village or location, and sometimes would actually be working in Gaborone, for instance. And of those that we didn't engage, I think only one was really quite, just felt was more comfortable being anonymous and not necessarily wanting to engage fully. And we actually needed to, literally send someone who is resident there to actually have them sort of complete the survey. So that was, and I guess that was really maybe the only outlier in terms of confidentiality in that way, in terms of actual data collection, in it not being us directly sitting down or administering or having that person or sort of clarifying issues. And then in Kang, it really was. I would really call it, and now there's a need, particularly with some of the conversations that we're having, not just in terms of the actual locations, but also in terms of some of the spaces that we're accessing. So when we're having, sort of engaging with media, for instance, at an Indigenous rights space where we were invited to, or even with some of the conversations with enablers, some of the back and forth that's coming out from UN agencies when we're talking and literally sort of trying to fight for space within some of their initiatives. Literally, a lot has happened in this quarter. And actually, on that way, we had another call from Lobatse where they requested for us to come through, so that they can be involved in the project. But obviously, we literally have very limited resources. I mean, these other locations were never actually included or predetermined beforehand. But we felt that it was very important to ensure that they included, not just because of the demands of the community, but also in ensuring that there is that credibility of having covered the entire country when we are to engage with policymakers. And usually that's the feedback that we get, like particularly, yes, the other beautiful part is the fact that we won two categories, I guess. Yeah, the other one was runner up, and the other one, one of the judges had to recuse themselves because I guess maybe they've worked with me closely, and I think one of the reasons that we heard that we really ran up is because the judges just didn't understand LGBTIQ issues. So, and which was really quite true with the feedback that we got afterwards, and I guess that's why we got runner up. So it was really, I mean, it's just yeah. And even with the other award, it was a tad bit political, I must say, because we were basically competing against mainstream media, and the one that won was really the leading independent media house, which would obviously be key in terms of reporting to the regional SADC Gender Protocol at Work summits under Gender Links in November. So and on the one with SRHR specifically, that's where we got insight, where people were sort of questioning our operating model. I think think tanks, research work, curating intellectual property is really very difficult for a lot of people, particularly because they understand LGBTI work as either health services or something to do with strategic litigation. And in a lot of instances, which really now sort of even speaks to some of grant making and so forth processes, with regards to the difficulty in the fact that the work that we do is really quite systematic, and it really actually is long term. It's not the easiest to fit within 12 months. And I think, yeah, it's really, we are, to be quite honest, beyond our time, beyond our operating model, beyond our resources, in terms of the work that we're doing, because, it's regional think tanks who are doing this kind of work. It's, people where there are large teams of specialists and technical experts that are engaging with these processes, and people who are sort of actively monitoring the M&E aspects consistently. And that's why they maybe have a lot of content in terms of sort of curating their impact and sort of, engaging with partners. So lots of lessons there. And then with Ghanzi, finally, it was quite difficult because all of them are working. So that was, the one place where we really were like a bit, surprised, because everyone was, basically employed. And we were very lucky to have one of our volunteers who previously sort of And it's very interesting in that you find that some of the other dynamics that play or influence is the fact that someone would obviously have a unique set of experience, um, and a lot of insight with what civil society work has been doing there and the gaps, and it's really understanding how can we sort of articulate that in a way that wouldn't be assumed as political, in a way that wouldn't be assumed as I guess the only solution, because in many instances when you're challenging some of these norms, people obviously do feel threatened, people obviously do feel like they are being targeted, but it is the truth. And I think what was really great and fantastic about that is that it's again a group of professionals, people who really have been revolutionary in their own way within their areas of influence, and who are willing to organize, and who are calling for support, and who are calling for us to be going to the smaller areas where particularly tribal groups, indigenous peoples, where there are queer members of the community, and obviously there really isn't much infrastructure, service delivery, so many other things, and you can imagine that kind of space. If you're different, it's a bit impossible to imagine. But anyway, it was really valuable insight. They were really quite open, and for me, that is the one area that I think there's so much beautiful work that can be done, particularly because we've found that rural communities have been a lot more helpful, even when you're looking for directions, trying to find places, and so forth. And what is beautiful is that they're even sort of pronoun affirmative, and you'd expect that from cosmopolitan or more urban areas. So these are some of the insights, and I think really it's just sort of trying to build justifications within the research report to ensure that this is a solid aspect of the findings, in terms of observations, and it's really it's too beautiful, and I think it's just holding on and making it sort of happen. And I think one thing to also mention now is currently I'm actually here, and in two days, over the weekend, I'll be addressing the Amnesty International General Assembly, where all the heads will be there, and all the country heads will be there. And this is just one example of how, I guess, in terms of sort of, if it's not myself or even one of my other volunteers who will be attending a sub regional Ashoka convening, I mean, it's unimaginable how we're getting sort of called and asked. And this is literally just from some of the experience of the accessing space, such as International Civil Society Week. And actually, about a month and a half ago, we actually sort of participated in the Amnesty's Next Strategy, a panel discussion speaking on partnerships and how they can include grassroots and outliers who operate outside formal civil society structures. So that was, I mean, it's great to lead up to this. And now, luckily, even though I'm not eligible, I'm in part of the youth task force and hoping to do some work in terms of capturing youth experiences from different regions. So, really exciting. And it's these little things that I think have been helping, build, or rather ensure that we're out there and ensure that we can have additional conversations, and hopefully sort of create something that is really quite meaningful and impactful. And I must say, a lot of these things are happening outside the LGBT space, outside the HIV space, because of political reasons. Yeah, well, whether it's political or whether it's other things, I mean, we've just learned that when we seem or when we become of value, that's when people start wanting to engage us. And I think, in as much as the LGBTIQ sector is of the firm belief of inclusion and diversity, particularly when looking at government, particularly when looking at other formal, larger civil society structures, they cannot replicate it themselves. Hurt people, hurt others, and so I think the challenges of self-preservation within the movement, within a small country like Botswana, within the few activists that are out there, within issues of visibility and voice, within issues of competition for funding, has really shown me how much of a mentally, economically, and socially, and at times, I guess maybe when I was much younger, physically unsafe space it is. And so we're proactively, literally, I guess, going where we are really wanted, in terms of, I guess, maybe enablers and working partners, and and all in the service of community members who are highly, not just, this isn't a need for them, they're highly interested, they're highly capable of contributing. And unfortunately, there isn't an enabling environment for it, there isn't an ecosystem for it, where there are entry points, whether it's ad hoc, sustained, or project related engagement, because of various issues detailed. But aside from that, thank you very much. Very excited.